Welcome back to Wargaming World, and I'm very pleased to say that this video is a how to play BOHICA, the new rule set designed and written by Paul Eaglestone. Just before we start, I want to mention three Facebook groups to be part of this discussion. One is BOHICA itself, so there's already a lot of discussion about these rules, and it's a really great group. There's also Vietnam War Wargaming, which I run myself, along with Wargaming World itself. And finally, if you're not already a subscriber to this YouTube channel, this is your moment just to click the subscribe, and on we go. Now, the approach I'm going to take is similar to the way I've done it for other games, other how-to videos, and I'm going to try and go through the rulebook somewhat page by page, so you get it in the right order, and then I'll try and play a very simple game across this table, and try and use the more simple elements of the rules, and perhaps just do an infantry exercise. I might then follow with a second and third video with more extensive games using helicopters, vehicles, etc. But let's start by having a look at the first thing, which is the key elements that we need in terms of dice, etc. Now, you might wonder why I start with dice, but it's because it's this. It's going to be a D20. That's your printable dice played through the game. Second dice is going to be that of an arrow dice. So you're going to either need to have one or to paint one up yourself, but the idea is to keep the game quick and to roll the dice, and it's going to be good for things like smoke, etc., looking for distance. Now, you'll see in the rules themselves they talk about markers as well for things like suppression. I'll let you pick that up as you've got your own copy. But importantly, and one of the good features straight away for the rule set is looking at the difference between the forces themselves and looking at what's referred to as skills and drills. What do I mean by skills and drills? Well, it's the difference between our civilians here, so where the scale is between 1 and 5, civilians would be a 1. We've got our Americans getting off the Huey there, and they may well be anything between 3, 4 and 5, 5 being the highest in terms of their skills and drills. So what are we talking about with skills and drills? It's about essentially the capability of the forces themselves. So we might well take an individual section, and we might drill all the way down into individuals and set individual levels of capability, or we might just have it as a section. So we might end up with a game of a dozen or so troops aside. We might say, well, we'll have one being 3 and the other 4, or we might have variety inside the section themselves. So we might have individuals with different skills. For example, you might have a veteran sergeant or a green officer appearing for the first time in Vietnam. I think the important point I'm going to raise here right from the start is that very much it's your game. So it means that you can set the forces based really on a scenario or history, something that you've read. There isn't a great deal of army lists within the original rule set. There may be others that come out, but what it really makes plain is that this isn't one for sort of the fastidious rule follower, I guess, in terms of forming the troops. You want to have a bit of variety, you want to have a bit of imagination in your own game, so therefore you can set up whatever game you want, whatever scale and size, and therefore think about how you might want to operate. If we go all the way down to the individual, you can imagine therefore there's going to be quite a lot of dice rolls as we have to work out individuals, so we might want to just look at it from a section point of view. But if you've got a platoon, we might have sections with different skills, and we can apply that into the game. So let's think, first of all, let's take up a particular platoon. Let's do it both for the NVA and the Americans, and then think about what that might look like. Okay, let's take a closer look, and this is exactly as it is in the rules, in the rulebook on page 9. If we were taking a look, for example, at the whole of the section, then on the left hand side we have the NVA, and with this group of 10 or 11 men we would look perhaps at 3 for the skills and drills across them, and for the Americans, for the troops here, for the 14 troops here, we would look as a whole, we might look at 4. However, we've gone further down, and so for the leaders of the 2 sections we've got 5 for each of those, and then for the fire teams we split them out a little further. So for the Americans you can see we've got 2 with skills and drills at 4, 1 at 3, and then we've got a variety across the NVA, 2, 3 and 4. Okay, so we've identified what a squad of the NVA and the Americans might look like, and then the rules begin to look in a little bit more detail about the men themselves. Remember, we could do things on an individual basis, and so we look not only at our skills and drills, but in terms of the actual weapons they have. So it could be the primary and secondary weapon, also things like the armour that they've got, whether they've got a flak jacket or not, and other elements such as grenades. So I won't go into a great deal of detail here, other than you'll know what you've got on the figures themselves, and again the rules are very flexible in terms of how you might want to use that. Also talks about who you'll identify as your NCO as well, looking at the officer there about how they then make impact a little later in these rules with regards to areas such as suppression. Finally, and not surprisingly again, we also have areas of command. So the chain of command again relates to these figures in terms of the number of inches we're looking at, about how far units can be away from each other in order to still be in contact and in command. It'll be no surprise that the vehicles also work in exactly the same way as our infantry. So primary, secondary and tertiary weapons. We'll have a crew, we'll have skills and drills, and principally it'll be the same format as how they operate. And again, as I go through the video, we'll see with some examples. There is a whole list here of all sorts of different vehicles, and gives good detail and good options there for both forces. So the way the rules work is an emphasis on a scenario, keeping things relatively simple. So it might well be that we've got either the Americans or NVA checking out these buildings, or alternatively we might have a Huey landing and looking through a particular jungle area. All sorts of different ways we want to look at it, but the emphasis here is to try and suggest to you that you think about the options where either force can be successful. You might set out perhaps attackers with twice as many troops as the other, but there's a number of ways you can add a little bit of variety. One of the options for variety is the different terrain you might have. So here, for example, we've got a very open area, and that might be advantageous for defending forces, or alternatively we might look in the background here where we've got a lot of jungle, or again buildings here, and indeed here in front of us we've got a river. So you can have all sorts of different types, depends what you've got, and indeed the rules begin to look at certain areas where you may have certain value to certain areas. So for example, you might put a hill in a particular place for you, if only because that sets you up for your defensive position. There's all sorts of different ways, but again, just to emphasize, the good thing about these rules is to give you a lot of flexibility to set the scenario that you think is most appropriate. One of the things I particularly like in the rule set is the fact that the civilians also play a part. So the idea is that they're respected by both parties, and there is a possibility where they can get involved in the game, in particular with what we have in terms of random events. Now again, the idea within the set is that you can set your own random events based on however you want to set it up. It's also really useful if you're going to play this solo as well. So you could actually be you could be the NVA or the Viet Cong, or whichever force you wanted to have, and set the random events in relation to that force. But there is an example for you. So on the D20 you'll be rolling for different events that take place during a turn, and as you can work through, you'll have the rule set yourself, so you can see how it might best fit for your scenario. But it's another really good feature of the variety that this game offers. And finally, before I go into a sample game, also make other reference to the terrain. So I've already said that you can set this out in whichever way you want, whether you want to have it with regards to a scenario, but there is subsequent detail in terms of the penalties and how difficult it is to move in certain areas, difficult terrain, jungle, etc. So you can go through the rule sets as you wish, but I think it's a good one to pause on and try and move into what it would look like if we had a initial action. So let's set that up, and we'll work through a game and pause each time to focus on each individual element of the rules. So I've set up a scenario, and unfortunately you'll have seen that the Huey that was there, unfortunately, when it was trying to take off, took a direct hit, and we've got some real trouble. So we've had units coming in, so we've got a radio team trying to get extra support. We've got an M113 that's in the back there, giving us a bit of armour. But the units that I already identified, so if you remember, we had our NCO there with a 5, we had 2 4s and a 3, and now spread out into this group, and they're going to now try and investigate and see where all the shooting has come from. And hidden away back in this area of cover, we've got the NVA. So we've got the units that we identified. So we've got the 2, 3 and the 4, and we've also got the command officers there with a 5, and they're waiting for the Americans to advance. And in between times we've got the civilians. So where and how might they add a bit of random events within the game? So let's have a look stage by stage and go through the rules with this as our scenario.